wrestling and everything coast to coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, Mike Leno, one of wrestling's premier photographers, and effervescent Evan Ginsberg. But tonight, our very special guest, and someone I've wanted to have on the show for quite some time, is the very talented Erin Bucknell, who is an indie wrestling photographer here in Northern California. But I guess you've got all over California, don't you?
Mostly Northern California. There's been a few other spots here and there, but I stick generally to a 3-hour or less drive.
I can hear you there. With the price of gas these days, who can afford to drive much further than that? So anyway, thank you for being on the show tonight. We are big fans of the indie wrestling scene here, whether it's in New York City with Evan Ginsberg or down in Southern California with Mike Leno, and obviously myself being here in Northern California. That's the one thing we all have in common greatly, is the indie scene. How did you get involved with the indie scene?
I originally got involved because I hung out with the TWFers 20 years ago when they were strictly a backyard fed. And then as they have evolved into a real legitimate trained company, I more or less came along with them.
Why don't you explain to the fans who the TWF are? Because we have
TWF is Total Wrestling Federation. They are, I suppose, nominally based out of the Sacramento area, but kind of more still a little bit south of that. Jake Sherman is the owner, and 20 years ago, he started a backyard wrestling federation in his mom's front yard, technically. Then we moved over to the playground. Then they got a ring and started doing shows. Everybody finally got trained, and now they are a legitimate promotion that does shows all over Northern California.
That's great. Now, so you primarily photograph WF shows, or?
It's pretty much a balance these days. I've got about 4 to 5 companies I do regularly. TWF is definitely in the mix, but I have enough now that I really have to rotate sometimes. And
you'd said before the show started, because I thought you had actually gotten in the ring as a competitor, but you said you did some backyard stuff.
I was a backyard manager. So I took a few bumps and I could throw a couple moves, and then I did try to get trained for about 2 weeks with Big Ugly when he was with SPW, but that was terrible, and let's never discuss that again.
Mike, you wanted to say something about Big Ugly?
Longtime friend of mine. God, who took it over? Sir Samurai took it over for.
Yes.
But is JD Big Ugly? Is he still involved in any way, or not?
Is he still involved in any way?
Yes.
Let me just say, I was hanging out with him yesterday in Gilroy because Wrestling for Charity just did a show, and guess who got back in the managing talks? Me. So yeah, I was hanging out with Big Ugly before the show because his youngest son was part of the show that we had in Gilroy. So yes, the good news is that JD is definitely involved. The good news is we're gonna have JD on the show. The bad news is he took a clothesline to the throat during a match. He hit the ropes straight on his larynx and can barely talk above a whisper for probably the next month or so. So he'll be on the show, and hopefully we'll get his son Titus, but not for a little bit. But sorry to interrupt you there, Erin. But to say that
I'm going to throw next to Evan, but I want to ask her, besides this group, Total Wrestling Federation, tell, obviously I'm interested because I've been shooting professionally since the early 70s, but even prior to that, Polaroids and small Minoltas in the 60s, wrestling in Los Angeles, primarily at the Olympic Auditorium. What other feds or groups have you photographed at? Have you gone to GCW or WWE house shows or anything like that? What have you shot?
Nothing that big. My regulars are pretty much all local in Northern California. I did West Coast a couple of times. I've done Hood Slam up in Reno, but that's really about as big as I've done. Most of my companies are local.
Yeah, I went the first few years, but it was hard to photograph because they let all the fans up right totally at ringside. And since of course, shooting through the ropes, as I'm sure you do, it's hard maneuvering. Like at Pro Wrestling Guerrilla now, in Los Angeles, in downtown LA, they let the fans right there, and you can't maneuver. I don't like missing a single high spot. But you said the West Coast Pro, which kind of took the place of APW, which was my place from even before Roland Alexander did his very first show. It was just a school. Tell me about that, because that's like the cream of the crop in workers. Who have you seen and photographed? Those shows have to be mega great.
Yes, it's been a while since I've been working for them, but Titus, of course, Charlie, Nick Wayne was there at the last one I was at.
Titus, tell our audience, Titus and Charlie. You mean Charlie Dempsey?
No. What is Charlie's last name? Charlie out of West Coast. Where's the overalls? I've completely forgotten what his last name is.
Oh, those are the locals, but like the fly-ins, mostly AEW guys and New Japan guys. Maybe tell us who some of the cool guys you've shot there. Like, is Orange Cassidy come in or?
No, nobody like Orange Cassidy. Carl Fredericks before he got picked up by the WWE. Kevin Blackwood was at one.
Johnny Morrison, did you ever get to work with him?
I have not. Well, I remember Johnny Morrison back when he was getting trained at SPW, but I've never actually taken pictures of him.
Okay. All right. Well,
how about the Reno guys that are, because when, I was there from day one of APW, same with Iron, and Adam Thornstowe came down and saved our show. The very first Oaktown Pro, which is now called Stars of Wrestling, that Icebox, the roller derby guy, put on. He had Tony Hernandez and I co-promote with him, and he kind of screwed over, we've all made up, but he kind of screwed over the Iron guys, Mike Modest, Donovan Morgan, Frank Murdoch, Bison Smith, all the great talents there. So we had to think fast, and Tony Hernandez and I got Adam Thornstowe, Mr. Primetime, Luster the Legend, and the other
Luster
of that group. Are Reno Scum, are they promoting still in Reno as a separate entity? And they used to have TV even. Do you know?
Luster and Paul, I believe, are the ones, Paul Isadora,
Right.
I believe are the ones who are running what used to just be APW Nevada. They just changed their name back to something else, and I can't think of what it is off the top of my head, but they are still doing
I think it's the
shows
Monster
up there.
Factory now.
Possibly. I'm not sure.
Well, let's go to Evan, because I was going to ask Evan. I know pretty much everything about Evan, who I've known forever. But Evan, have you taken any clotheslines or any bumps? Have you ever? I know you've been involved in all aspects of wrestling and managing, but
I've heel managed, but anytime I've walked into a dressing room, I've told the promoter I'm not a trained wrestler. I'm just not going to. Especially, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not going to endanger myself. But there have been times, there was one promoter that really didn't speak much English, and his guys were chasing us, and I was really running because I didn't know if they got the message, don't put your hands on me. I was really running. So, but here's my question. Since we have two photographers, and Erin and Mike, and I'm a layman, what is a great wrestling photograph? Like, I've seen photos with luchadors where it looks like they're flying and it's beautiful shots. And I've seen pictures of superstar Billy Graham posed where he looks like a Greek god. What is your version of a great wrestling photograph? I'm asking both of you.
Well, for me, both where you can capture excellent flying action is good. But then I also like if I can get a good, well-lit close-up shot of selling, especially in the face. If I can get a good facial reaction shot, that's one of my favorites.
Mike?
I like, it's often hard, particularly when guys have long hair and it covers their face, their faces, like a guy with a simple headlock or drop kicking. Those elements of capturing their faces without having any blur, having it crystal clear, and then the move, because, in the old days we could control it much more with the cameras we had and the film we were using, like Tri-X 400 ASA for black and white shots. And the magazines mostly wanted black and white in the old days, in the 70s.
Cheaper to produce, cheaper to reproduce.
Yeah, and color was strictly for the cover. Maybe if it was Wrestling World, they had 4 color pictures on the inside. But it's just I don't like missing any high spots, and then it almost seems like cheating when you're using a digital camera because you eliminate out constantly reviewing after. I don't know if you do this, Erin.
Oh yeah, I love the burst mode.
Delete all the shitty photos.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that is how I do my art. I take thousands of shots and then I choose the ones I like best.
And Erin, I live in New York where paparazzi photographers are just a way of life. So my big question to you would be, why wrestling? Why not celebrities or
flowers,
boxing or
flowers don't move.
Roller derby or whatnot? Why wrestling?
Wrestling is because I love wrestling. When I was back with TWF, I started doing pictures for them because that was the one way I could think that I could help them out. The pictures were terrible. I had no idea what I was doing. My camera was just, some cheap point and click thing. And then over the years, I've gotten much better at it and gotten better equipment. But I do wrestling because I love wrestling. It is certainly not for the money.
Where did your love of wrestling come from? How did it start?
I watched it a little bit off and on as a kid, and then I really got into it when I was a teenager, about high school. It was right before the Attitude Era, but high school is really where I got into it.
Did your parents introduce you to wrestling, or who introduced you to wrestling?
Oh, God, no. My mother hates wrestling. I have tried numerous times to get her to go to shows, and the answer is always, no. Nobody in my family likes wrestling. This has purely been me. I had a few high school friends at the time, and one of them who went on to be a TWFer is the one that got me to go to TWF originally a couple years after high school, I think it was.
But did you start how did you come across like television wrestling? Just by accident, or friends said, hey, this is cool stuff to watch? Or
yeah, I watched it a little bit as a kid, and then in high school, I think I went over to a friend's house and she had one of the WWE magazines on her coffee table. So I flipped through it, and this was at a time when the storylines were all the thing. So I really got into reading the storylines in that magazine, went home and watched the next WWE Raw episode, which I think had just started airing not too long before that. And then I was just hooked from there.
That's when they were doing stuff in that theater in New York City?
I think so, yeah.
Oh yeah, that was pretty intense. Those were fun early shows of Raw, before they had the 25-minute promos, and picture in picture and shrinking the wrestling action to a thumbnail size while they bring you the full blown ad and all the audio on it. Evan and I have rallied against that for a little while. Are you still a fan of the WWE and AEW and so forth?
I am a huge AEW fan. Watch everything AEW. I do most of the NXT stuff. Mostly WWE is only the pay-per-views these days, but that's pretty much only because I don't have cable right now, so I'd have to just watch either quite delayed on Peacock or the really trunicated version on Hulu.
Raw is moving January 1st to Netflix.
Right. And at that point, if I can fit it in, I will probably watch it more.
I'm going to break the bullet. So you realize there is at least 2, if not more, hours of wrestling per week. For example, Thursdays, 2 hours of TNA, followed by perhaps the best show of the week, New Japan, which I know Evan has had New Japan World, but those shows are can't miss. They had Naito versus was it Sonata last week? They're just out of this world. A whole hour dedicated to one match. They still have picture-in-picture, so it's but the picture-in-picture sometimes is good, sometimes is the bane of our existence. But are you watching? Even Saturday night or Friday night, you got 2 hours of SmackDown on an AEW page, and even Saturday you get 2 hours. Tony Khan, thank God, Rampage is going to be a thing of the past. It's going to be eliminated from what we hear in January, because it's just too much. It's too much AEW, and they're not even doing enough storytelling. It's my problem. I love it. That's a show I never fast forward through Dynamite or Collision.
Yeah, but you can only tell so many stories when you're doing eight-man tag matches per night. You're not going to be able to get many storylines in
But let's ask Evan. I don't know if we've asked him. I'm sure he's told us before. But Evan, was it your father who introduced you to wrestling, and what was, to your knowledge, what?
No, I'll tell you exactly what happened. I was a kid. I was maybe 12, and it was a rainy, boring Sunday, and I was going through the UHF dial, which just searching for something to watch. And all of a sudden, I come across this monstrous guy is pounding on this other guy. And I didn't even know what it was. I had never seen it. And it turned out it was Chief Jay Strongbow who was taking a beating. And all of a sudden, he does this herky-jerky war dance. It's like 1972. And I'm like fascinated. And all of a sudden, he's chopping the guy and he wins. And the crowd erupts. And I'm a kid and I think it's real. And I just started watching it every week and started to know the wrestlers. And then came the point where I begged my father to take me, and it was 50 years ago, June 1974, and I walk into Madison Square Garden, and the first thought that goes in my head is, wow, it's in color, because we had a black and white TV. I was a kid, I was clueless, and we thought it was real, and the main event was Bruno and Strongbow against Nikolai and Freddie Blassie, and the Valiants and Dean Ho and Tony Garea. And years later, I'm shoot managing Johnny Valiant with his comedy tour and his bookings. And Jimmy's a dear friend, and Nikolai was a dear friend, and surreal. The whole thing has been like a surreal ride. And
tickets were like $5, right?
Tickets were 3 to 6, and we were a blue collar audience. My dad was a taxi driver, and they actually announced, because it was like a big deal, that they were going up to 4 to 7, and the place like booed, like showered them with booze, because that dollar meant something to a blue collar crowd. My dad never broke 25 grand in his life, and when you see the current MSG card, WWE's coming December 26th. It's $70 to $1,011. $1,000.
Which really sucks, because it is totally eliminated what you were just talking about. Families, good, hardworking people. They were, of all ethnicities in the 70s when I would go to, Madison Square Garden. I wish it was a lot more. I wish I lived there, because the cards were insanely great. But you kind of, now it's like all spoiled wealthy people, and a lot of people swear off going to MSG wrestling, WWE.
Or there's only 3 or 4 shows a year instead of 12 to 14 back in the day. So it becomes a Christmas present, a birthday present, a graduation present, or whatnot. The whole thing has changed. And so it's no different with AEW, really. It's a little cheaper, but my buddy took himself and three other people to AEW, and he spent $600 for the night with food, parking, and tickets. That's not a cheap night out.
Erin, have you been to any big shows? Any of the big shows like a WWE or AEW show recently?
Not recently. I went to AEW probably about a year ago when they were in Sacramento. Got third row tickets. I was very excited about that. I was a little disappointed that I did not go to Stockton, because when I saw all of the wrestlers that I know being enhancement talent, I realized that I really should have gone to see them, if nothing else.
But when AEW was here in San Francisco, the cheapest seats were $75, and those were for like the worst seats. Plus, then you pay the service fee, and for parking downtown San Francisco is like another $50. So,
what was the venue? Weren't they at the Cow Palace?
No, it was a Golden One. I'm sorry, it was not Golden One. It was at the Chase Center. It was over at the Chase Center.
They were at the Chase Center, really?
Yeah, and so big money.
You start talking 2 parents and 2 kids, you're looking at $500 easy by the time you're done with everything, and not everybody could afford it.
Well, this brings back the conversation to indie wrestling because that's where you can get something affordable.
Oh yeah.
So, do you how many indie shows, Erin, do you think you make per year?
Per year, probably somewhere in the 35 to 40-ish range.
Wow.
I'm usually doing at least 3 out of 4 weeks at any given time.
Now,
again, so it's TWF, and then are you going to the Sacramento? Is it SPW? Is that?
I don't usually do SPW. They have their own photographer, and they usually have shows on Sundays, which I don't particularly like to do. My other normal companies are Next Level Pro Wrestling, Ugly Dojo, which is run by the Big Ugly, Hood Slam when they're in Reno, Virgil Flynn when they're running, which unfortunately isn't very often, but they have great shows. I love them so much. South Bay, which is in Santa Clara, and then a few others here and there. But those are my regulars.
You mentioned Virgil.
Friend of
Virgil.
Yes.
Yeah,
I miss so much. Hold on a sec, Mike. I just want to say, I miss Virgil so very much. He was such a good guy. We had him in CCW in some of his earlier matches. He had just started wrestling, and I think about him all the time. And I love that Fed. I love the Virgil Memorial Federation.
They named a promotion after him. Is that?
That's the one.
He was running the company before he passed, and then the wrestlers who worked for him have continued it on to help support his family and his legacy.
Who is there, and is it out of Sacramento as well?
It's mostly out of Sacramento. It's run by Joe DeSole, mostly local guys. A lot of people that wrestle for Hood Slam. It's kind of like Hood Slam Sacramento, more or less.
Let me throw something in here real quick. I think it's very important that the so-called wrestling journalists acknowledge people like Virgil. Overanalyzing to the point of exhaustion everything you saw the night before on Raw, SmackDown, or AEW is just overkill. Why not acknowledge these indie wrestlers, indie promoters, whoever it is, historians and such? Slam Wrestling does a good job of it. Pro Wrestling Stories does also. But for the most part, the wrestling media ignore these guys unless
not us.
Yeah, not us.
The mainstream wrestling media.
Probably a third of the shows we've done have been tributes to guys who have passed. And
this is a really young guy. He could have easily been a junior heavyweight, in TNA's X division, or basically AEW, or WCW, because he was alive back at that.
But unless they had that WWE or TNA or AEW run, for the most part, the media ignore when they pass, or it's one line in the Observer: indie wrestler so and so passed away.
So let me ask you guys, and Evan may already know about this. I don't know if Russ has heard of it. WWE what is this new thing called ID, where schools, they've delineated now, they want to sort of have more farm systems, or they're calling it new school territories, that they're going to recognize and give their seal of approval to, as well as wrestlers that can, if they put, so not just the schools, and one of them would be Knox Pro, run by Rikishi in Southern California, Booker T's Reality of Wrestling, Seth Rollins' promotion in Nebraska, or wherever it is, Omaha, I think. And, some of the other ones, Cody's place, Nightmare School in Atlanta. But also wrestlers on those indies are going to be given the WWE seal of approval, so they can come to Orlando and use the Performance Center at will, and they may start utilizing them. I think this is an attempt to tell indie wrestlers, that's my point, indie wrestlers, that you're still of value. We're not just going after former basketball players like Lash Legend and gymnasts. All these people are populating NXT now, never worked on indies, had no thought of ever becoming a wrestler. They were just amateur great athletes. And some of them have done very well. This Tiffany Stratton, who was, I think, a volleyball player. or gymnast as well. So Ev, what do you think of that? So they're only, out of all of the tons of schools, and there have been, I guess, X number of ones that they're going to be really slighted because the guys running the schools never made it. So it's like, what are you going to get at a school like that? I'd rather go to a Booker T or.
I think it's going to be like anything else that WWE does. It's going to be self-serving. It's going to be nepotism, cronyism. There's tons of good schools throughout the country, and unless you are part of that organization, like a Booker T or a Cody or whatnot, I don't see it benefiting anybody but them. They'll cherry pick the best of the best out there, and
they want to get a head up on AEW because Tony Khan's purse strings are, both great, but it's also his undoing. He has so much talent, super talent like Seth or Andrade. Some of these guys that don't get TV time, they say, "F it, I'm out of here," and they leave. Like, we don't even know what's going on with Phoenix. Phoenix and Pentagon hadn't been on TV in 4 or 5 months, and finally Pentagon was on TV in like a throwaway opener last night on Collision. So that brings me back to Erin. TWF, when you said these guys got trained, who did the training? Was it somebody in-house? Did they also incorporate a school? Like a lot of these indies, they have a school and then they put on shows to where their talent can work. Is that how TWF works, Erin?
Well, right now, when they got trained, there was a little bit of work with Mike Modest, and there was a few other people. And then one of the wrestlers, Landon, went and got trained by Lance Storm up in Canada. And then he came back and taught everybody else. And most of the roster these days has been trained by one of the schools locally, mostly the Next Level and 209 Dragon's Den, I believe.
Wow, I haven't even heard of that. Tell us a little about 209 Dragon's Den. I know
that is the lead trainer. That is Mike Hayashi right now, and that is out of Lodi. And it's more or less owned, I believe, by Matt Freeman, who is a TWF wrestler. And that's pretty much what I know about them. They're more or less TWF's training school, but it's not an official thing.
And then before I shut up for a sec, it sounds like Marcus Jacobson is pretty much done with APW. Like, I think he did promote some shows after the 2 Cow Palace ones I shot, ringside and backstage and stuff. But he said it would be hard for him to top what he accomplished, because he purchased the rights to APW, the promotion, and Sparky Ballard, the great ref, I forget his real name. Spark bought APW boot camp, and he sort of ran it, and then that ceased when the school, he was at his promotion in school at an abandoned elementary school, and they booted him out. I guess they razzed that whole school building. I don't know if there's any more APW boot camp, and from what I heard, APW hasn't run shows since the pandemic started. Is that your knowledge of it as well?
That is more or less what I know. I've never really known Marcus very well, so I can't speak to what his plans are or anything, but I haven't heard any shows about APW for a while now.
Did you ever get a chance to shoot them? Because Evan even came out with his friend, Evan could talk about that. A dear friend of ours, obviously Evan's very, very close.
Tiger.
Yeah, Tiger. But did you ever get a chance to shoot APW? Mostly they had shows at an elementary school just outside the Cow Palace.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I did go to a few shows back in the day, but I only really got serious about my photography, interestingly enough, right before COVID hit.
So,
Russ, let's ask her though. You did touch on something. Do you shoot anything else? Because I've shot a lot of rock concerts. I love shooting, animals, birds in the backyard, squirrels, Halloween stuff. I was all over the place with Halloween stuff down here. But tell us actually, how and why did you pick up a camera, and are you at least shooting other things? Maybe not regularly, but other than wrestling.
I don't do anything else, professionally. But I do really like to do nature and wildlife photography. And I actually really got into photography when I had a kind of local travel blog for a few years. I don't have that anymore, but that's really where I started to get interested on what makes a good picture and how to get a good one. And that I realized I actually had something of a talent for it.
Can you drag up or hold up a couple of your shots, something that, because I'm going to try to do that as my end. And then let's throw back to Evan. He hasn't, I'm going to shut up Evan for a while.
What is your favorite picture of all the pictures you've taken? That's a tough question.
Jeez, yeah, that's a really tough one. I don't know if I could possibly.
Is there one are there a few you're proudest of that come to mind?
Not any one in particular. There's a few really good ones that I just got at Oasis Pro's tribute to Deathmatch in Vacaville not too long ago. I mean, it as a wrestling fan, Deathmatch is not my preferred genre, but as a photographer, it really does make for good pictures. And I can pull them
outside the ring.
What?
There's a lot of activity outside the ring.
Oh yeah, yes.
So you don't have to worry about the ropes.
I had to shoot. I was the official photographer for Rob Black and Kevin Kleinrock's XPW.
Oh, nice.
After that, Wrestling Society X, which aired on VH1 and MTV. But the deathmatch stuff and the exploding light bulbs, everything was legit that they were using. And it was just so abhorrent to me. Even though I shot in Japan, Erin probably doesn't know, I've shot wrestling all over the world. Mexico City at Arena Mexico, Sale, but obviously Tokyo Dome for the Flair Fujinami in 1991. I'm the only Gaijin foreigner ringside for that the very first New Japan versus NWA WCW.
That's nice.
The Dome and some other stuff, but the Onita, I got to shoot my share of Onita's FMW, and having blood squirted on you and people. Under her helmet.
Oh yes. I made sure I had my goggles on, and thanks to a rather disturbing story from fellow photographer Paul Pond about getting glass in his ear once, I made sure to throw my hoodie up and on the entire time I was taking any shots that had glass
We've had Paul
anywhere in it.
We've had Paul on the show as well, by the way.
Yeah.
He's a friend of the show as well. In fact, that's what I wanted to ask you is, has there been any match where you felt like you were like in real danger of being ringside?
True danger, no. I did get my camera kicked into my face once and got a nice little laceration on my nose. So that was a fun time, but no real injuries there.
Who did that to you, by the way? They must have.
It was an accident and mostly my fault for being in the way. So I'm not going to call anybody out on that. But I think for the most time, I've been pretty good about being able to dodge wrestlers.
When referees go down and their legs come out of the ring and maybe. Oh yeah. Matt, you
gotta watch out for the athletic referees that are diving in to make the 3 counts.
Let me tell you a quick story. Evan I don't think I've ever even told Evan this. It was in Japan. New Year's is not just a day; it's an entire week, and all of the promotions every year for the whole week of New Year's, starting on January 1st. Like at Korakuen Hall, which is like the MSG of Japan. You'll have 3 groups running a show, like All Japan Women. I would shoot. The show would start at 10 a.m. And then 2, 3 in the afternoon, New Japan would come in. And in the evening, it might be JWE Women's Group or FMW and so on. And in one day, I had my ribs broken twice. Oh. All Japan Women, I had Bull Nakano fall on me. And in the evening, it was a New Japan show. And Chris Benoit, who I was rooming with, long story, at Inoki's New Japan Hotel, but he still had the mask on, his Pegasus kid, and he fell out and clobbered me because they're just going at a high rate of speed. We were just, that was when that Satoru Sayama Tiger Mask, that whole rapid moving stuff. Prior to that, all the guys I used to cover, from Freddie Blassie or Killer Kowalski, it's mostly in ring. They didn't go outside the ring very much.
Yes, I've learned that when wrestlers are brawling out on the floor, I definitely like to keep the ring post in between myself and them. That's usually a good barrier for wrestlers getting thrown around. Not 100%, of course, but is usually pretty good.
Now, Erin, can you tell us, like, maybe what your favorite match was to photograph? Like, One that you just really felt like you got, the perfect shots out of?
There's just been so many that's really hard to say. My one favorite, again, at that Oasis show not too long ago, there was a 6-man scramble with a bunch of great wrestlers in it that was just fantastic. And they were just flying all over the place and coordinating beautifully. And it was just a great match.
Now, do you listen to the matches going over so that you kind of know when the high spots are going to be, so you be in the right place?
Yes, usually if I'm allowed, which is most of the time, I will be in the booking meeting. And then sometimes I do tell wrestlers, at least that I'm close with, hey, if you've got something big you want me to shoot, let me know when it's going to be so I can be sure to get it. But for the most part, I really don't know too much what's going to happen.
That's going to make it a little tough to anticipate.
It does sometimes, but I've gotten pretty good, I think, at being able to tell when wrestlers are going to do certain things depending on what they're doing right beforehand.
That is kind of the secret, is to just anticipate where the big high spots are going to happen.
Yes. I always appreciate when a wrestler or luchador does the whole clap, clap, clap point before they run the ropes and do a dive. So I know to get over to catch the dive before they do it. That's always appreciated.
Nice. That is very
Let's
good.
ask her about, it's no longer a big deal because women have been in the locker rooms for the NFL and Major League Baseball for a couple of decades now. But how is, at APW, they would have the wives, the girlfriends, and the kids in there. But backstage, tell us about, if it's like all men, or do you feel a little weird, or no big deal backstage?
It's really no big deal. The guys, pretty much all the guys I'm friends with, or at least, I'm friends with like 3/4 of the wrestlers, so I feel comfortable around them. They don't seem to be uncomfortable around me, but it is really awesome when they do the South Bay women's only shows and I'm in the locker room and it's almost all women. That's always really interesting. I like that a lot.
Who wrestles for that? Is like Christy Von Eerie? Is she still?
Oh yeah, Christina. And I will preface that Christina and I are very good friends, but I love her to death.
Would you please tell her to come on the show?
I will absolutely
like
tell
5 or 6
her.
times.
Aaron, give her my email because I owe her a bunch of photos with I shot Jeff Jarrett's tournament thing when she became women's champion for.
Nice.
GC.
Okay, yeah, I'll let her know, definitely.
I owe her a bunch of photos, plus at the Hall of Fame that was both in South San Francisco or wherever. It was in Pacifica at the Sparky Ballard School, and then all the ones that were in like Modesto and Stockton. So I owe Christina a lot of photos of her since she started, plus her against, Mr. Wrestling. What's his name? His wife, Johnny Gargano's wife.
Candace.
Yeah, Candace LeRae. I've got a singles of her against Christina in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, and then they were opposing each other in a mixed tag with 2 other men on each team.
You were thinking of JJ Perez, right?
No.
Mr. Wrestling 4?
No. I don't think she ever dated JJ.
Oh, okay. It's
no big
crazy business. Now, Erin, what kind of camera do you use for?
I have a Nikon D500, and I got that one a few years ago, right before COVID, specifically because it was recommended well for fast action and low light. The ISO on that thing is just insane, which is incredibly helpful because so many wrestling promotions do not light their rings well at all.
Oh, wow. Okay. Looks like Evan Ginsberg is having a little bit of technical. You back, Evan?
I seem to be.
There we are. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to send Russ one of my photos. I just, when Russ asked or Evan asked your absolute best or most favorite famous photo, this one I'm sending Russ of, I shot it in August of 1975 at the Chicago Amphitheater. Bobby Heenan with Bockwinkel and Stevens the night they dropped their AWA World Tag Titles to Bruiser and Crusher in the main event, 2 out of 3 falls. There was a riot afterwards, which I love. This photo, I never get credit on it. People have just stolen it and slapped it on all of their websites. It's the first one that comes to mind when I Googled Stevens, Heenan, Bockwinkel. Russ, I'm going to send it to you in a second.
Okay.
And it's weird because it's a color shot, but everybody's somehow they did like black and white on it.
Now, Erin, I do want to know, are you a big fan of wrestling history, or is it just really the indie stuff that you're into?
I'd say that I am a big fan of everything that I watched as it was happening. I do have basic knowledge of 70s and 80s wrestling, but I'm certainly not a historian of it.
That's this guy over here. Living history of all that. And Evan obviously saw a lot of it as it was happening. So as much as he can remember, he's...
I'm 103 years old. I was at Gotch Hackenschmidt. I was a baby.
Yes, you saw Samson versus Goliath.
That's right.
Colas Bruno at the Garden in 75.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is
But it
it
was like
something that you want to learn more about wrestling history? You're okay just being involved in like the indie stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, in this day and age with Wikipedia and Google and all that, anything that I have any interest in, I can look up at the time. And I certainly do that quite frequently, but I certainly wouldn't want to say that I am knowledgeable about the past eras.
Okay, well, I did want to ask, because if you could take a photograph of any wrestler in history, well, dead or alive,
oh goodness,
a photo shoot with?
Honestly, I'd probably want to shoot Andre the Giant. I as a kid, Princess Bride was, a movie I still love. I always thought Andre was amazing.
Movie. It's the perfect movie.
I've always thought Andre was just spectacular. He seemed like an incredibly nice, fun guy. I think shooting him would have been great fun.
Absolutely. Pretty amazing. Especially if you went out to dinner and he paid the tab.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was.
I don't think I would have been able to afford the tab if I was paying.
Few people could, the way he eats and the way he drank, for sure. That's great. What about from someone from right now, if you could photograph, who would that be?
If we're talking ringside, then it would probably be like Kenny Omega or Jay White, and a couple of my favorite wrestlers. I really like their styles. Portraiture, I don't know if there's anyone specifically currently that I'd really like to do portraiture. It's really not so much more my thing than ringside. Yeah, I think probably Kenny Omega or Jay White. Will Ospreay. Action-wise, definitely.
These guys are big fans of both of those guys. So Omega and Ospreay. I wish they were getting used more.
Their debuts in the U.S. were on a PWG show I shot. I think it was 2012 or 13 or something. Maybe it was a little bit later, but they looked so young, and everybody said, "Oh, where do you see these guys?" And I go, "Who are these guys?" Both on the same show. Ospreay, Omega, the Bucks were kind of up there because they've been wrestling quite a while, and the main event was Roderick Strong against the guy that he's in AEW now. He was last teaming with Chris Daniels. You know who I'm talking about? He does the mantra gimmick. But he was teaming with Chris Daniels before Chris became the figurehead of AEW, the on-camera thing. So that's the main event. Roderick Strong against him, and it was a high-flying match because Roderick was doing a lot of flying moves, which he doesn't do anymore. He's wrestling a lot smarter, not harder.
Now, Erin, when you're not doing wrestling photography, what is it that you do for business?
For my shoot job, I work for an insurance company. Basically, I help clients maintain their OSHA logs.
Okay. That's very different.
Medical dental?
Yeah, medical. Basically, most companies have to keep a log for OSHA of all the serious injuries that occur, and I help companies decide what injuries need to go on their logs.
Have you been doing that for a long time?
About 6 or 7 years now, and then before that, I was a workers' compensation claims assistant for the same company.
Oh, so you've been involved in that area of...
Oh, yeah, for a very long time now.
Wow.
Which is also why I knew to wear the goggles during the deathmatch shooting, because I have heard many stories about various things in eyeballs, and I was not about to let that happen to me.
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to say, if you love your eyes, don't watch the Tales of the Territories or Beyond the Dark Side of the Ring, because somehow... Each one of those episodes, somebody gets something in the eye. They get their eye almost taken out. It's pretty.
Yeah. No.
Did I ever tell you guys the best eyeball story of all time?
Oh no, I'm afraid.
I don't know if Mike ever heard this, but The Valiant brothers are wrestling. Jimmy pulls out a blade, accidentally nicks Johnny in the eyeball, not in the eye, in the eye. He's blind in one eye. He keeps wrestling. The next day he has a match. He's blind in one eye and he wrestles. And finally, 2 or 3 days later, he goes to the optometrist in Pittsburgh and they fixed it. This is how tough these guys are. I mean, can you imagine?
And how relentless the schedule was. You know, you just couldn't miss time. You know, you wouldn't get paid if you took time off.
And Johnny was thanked by being unceremoniously dropped by Vince, who was his buddy in military school, without any reason given. You know, he had no idea what he did to get on the bad list or whatnot. And he was always hurt by the fact that basically he was never welcomed back. You know, like they always had Nikolai back on and, you know, other legends, Bob Orton Jr.
Even the Iron Chief.
Snooker, Piper, they would always come back. And Johnny was persona non grata, and he never understood why. He never understood. So,
did Johnny ever say, because Vince had no relation to his father, Vince Sr. at that point, how did they end up going to the same military school? That's so crazy.
When they were kids, teenagers. Johnny had this theory. He said, because I was friends with Vince, I wasn't scared of him like the other wrestlers. That was his theory. You know, the fear factor didn't kick in. So I'm just saying what he said to me. I don't know.
Now, Russ, I've sent you guys both what I consider to be one of my best shots, because it's both a wrestling shot, but a sort of in-ring through the ropes portraiture that I want Erin to see. I don't have her email, so Russ, I'm going to ask you for her email.
Yeah, I'll send it to her through Facebook.
Well, why don't you show it? Put it on the screen.
I can do that. Hold on, let me go and grab it. But
so it's all over the place in black and white. I don't know why anyone would take my color photo and sepia it, or whatever you want to call it, because I've sent you both the color, which I shot. It was like August 5th, 1975 at the Chicago Amphitheater. And they still had their belts. It's right before they dropped them. 2 out of 3 fall to Bruiser and Crusher, with about 1 million beers thrown into the ring when Bruiser and Crusher lost one of the falls. The first fall, that's kind of what happened. They lost the first fall, I think. And then they won the next 2, you know, to get the audience all wrapped up. But this has been used. It was on the cover of a couple of books. Heenan, I think, had it on the back cover of his book. Slam's got it all over the place on Greg Oliver's Slam website. When, you know, it's hard to believe all of my heroes, the people I knew, are all pretty much gone now, other than Dory Jr., Les Thatcher. There's only a very handful, Greg Valentine, a Territory guy, still alive.
Black Gordman.
Black Gordman's still alive. Neil Motstritz still alive.
Here, let me pull it up for you. But in the meanwhile, you know, did you actually know Virgil before he passed, Erin?
Briefly. Interestingly enough, he also got his start, or at least was in early TWF, but the times we were there never actually overlapped. So I did meet him a few times, but we weren't hugely close, unfortunately.
Okay, he was really such a nice guy. Here's the picture that Mike wanted to share with everyone. Nice. It's a low res, so
packed.
Yeah, it's not
amphitheater, one of the great venues of them all. You know, that was one of my bucket list things: shooting every territory, shooting every great venue, shooting in every major city that allowed wrestling on the planet. I didn't get to shoot, you know, obviously in North Korea for that tour. That was kind of out of my league. But Evan, you've seen that shot before.
Yeah, many times. Why don't you do a photography book, the best of your pictures?
Yeah, let's get this total.
No, we're talking to Erin. You, Mike, you should have done yours years ago. But we're talking to Erin and see if maybe she might be interested in that.
Actually, interestingly enough, I am working on my first one right now, which is going to be strictly TWF photos from the last few years, and it's kind of a proof of concept. I think those wrestlers and those wrestling fans would probably be the most receptive to it, so that's where I'm starting with, and then we'll see how it goes from there. I also have plans with one wrestler to do one specifically just for him, but I will wait until we're closer to actually announce who and when that'll be.
Well, when you are ready to sell that book, want to promote it, please, we'd love to have you back on the show to help talk about it. And we really want to help everybody in the indie scene get as much done as possible because, Vince and the WWE, they have, their way of promoting stuff, and it's so much harder for the indie side of things. So when people are working hard like you to make the indie scene happen, we want to help you in everything that you are trying to do. Now, what's for the future for you, Erin? What do you have other than the book? What's in your future?
I think right now, at least, I'm pretty content with what I'm doing. I've got a decent amount of companies that I really like working with. And I've got enough time off in between to relax and recuperate. I could probably fit maybe another company or two in.
Wrestling for Charity is going to start doing more shows.
There you go. Absolutely. Get in contact with me about it.
That show, the Wrestling with Charity show.
Oh, that was the one we just did in Gilroy.
Right, but who was on it? Can you give us?
Well, you'll have to. Well, since the show happened yesterday, it's no use to really promote. We had a lot of kids, a lot of young guys that were on the show, really new. But Boyce LeGrand was the headliner. Or he had a 3-way title match. I
should throw this out. Those two MFR scumbags, Monty and the Pharaoh, they have my shot. I could sue the shit out of them, Evan and Russ. They have my shot all over their website and on their YouTube without permission, without crediting me. They're using it at high res. So they probably.
Buddy Sotelo will help you on that one. So we'll talk about that later. But
I've got to go. My voice is just about to give out, you guys. Pleasure meeting you, Erin. I hope to be in touch with you.
Absolutely.
Soon. And both you guys, all three of you guys, have a great.
It is really good to see you back, Mike, and you sound great.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you again.
Good to see you, Mike.
Next week.
Thanks, Ev. And Russ.
So. Yeah, exactly. And then a cough right at the end there. So, all right. Well,
still hear you. I haven't. It hasn't stopped.
All right. So, you wouldn't know he was just suffering from a major thyroid operation. So we're really glad to have him back. Evan, have you got any other questions you'd like to ask Erin? Well, Mike's not hogging the mic.
Sure. I've been involved with the Indies in various capacities for the longest time, and I find that many times they just don't promote well, including the wrestlers themselves. By the way, I'm wrestling tonight is not promotion. And it's BTW, I'm wrestling tonight.
Right.
3 PM, they put this on their Facebook page. So I see certain flaws that are throughout, and I love indies, don't get me wrong. You don't need 16 matches. The card shouldn't go 4 or 5 hours, etc. so on.
Please don't go 4 or 5 hours. I cannot be on my feet that long.
Yeah, and there's certain mistakes that many of them make. Do you feel comfortable as an insider who has backstage access and whatnot to present some of this? Because, I find many times promoters and wrestlers are looking more for compliments than constructive criticism. And it's almost like awkward. You don't want to force yourself on people, but I was at a card with years ago, a while back, Johnny Valiant and Nikolai Volkov, and there was one paid customer, one. And the first thing Johnny and Nikolai said, because they were old school, they go, I didn't see a single sign anywhere in the town, in the neighborhood, in store windows. Is just posting on social media enough? I mean, I've seen too many promoters lose their shirts, and part of it is self-inflicted. What's your take on that?
No, I agree. I mean, there's definitely a place for social media advertising. I've helped out with that a little bit sometimes, and I find that Facebook is the one place I've noticed that you can direct ads strictly to wrestling fans within a certain amount of miles around your venue, which is incredibly helpful. But that can't be the only thing you're doing. I think there's definitely a place for in-person flyering and putting up posters in businesses that I don't think enough companies do these days, probably because it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. But, you can't rely strictly on the WWE, AEW fans. You've got to build up your own fan base. And I think that's one thing that Hood Slam was amazing at, is that they convinced non-wrestling fans that going to wrestling events live is great fun. And I think that's one of their biggest strengths, and why they have such fantastic crowds is because of that.
And the generic post where you have 37 guys on the post with no main event, no co-feature listed, that tells me not to go instead of to draw me in. So, do they ever learn from that?
Are you going to do any photography for any upcoming Hood Slam shows?
Not right now. I don't think I have anything. I usually only do Hood Slam Reno, and coming up in the winter, that's pretty much hit or miss whether they'll have shows and whether I can actually make it up.
Make it, yes, yeah. I agree. That 80 is not a lot of fun sometimes. Highway 80 is not a lot of fun to Reno from Sacramento.
I could take the excuse to take the train up there, though, so that might work out at some point.
But then it's late, and so
well, yes, I'd have to get a hotel and stay the night and all that, but it could be worth it once or twice.
And the Indies wind up paying you, right, for your?
Oh yeah, yes.
Good.
Yes. There's depending on how much can depend on how good of friends I am with the promoter, but I'll give discounts occasionally, but I do absolutely get paid.
Wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour, and you've been an absolutely fabulous guest.
Thank you.
You answered all of our crazy questions and listened to Mike's long stories, so you deserve some kind of medal. But we can't really hand those out. What we can do is help you promote yourself on social media and any sites you'd like to mention to our fans.
Yep, you can just look me up, Erin Bucknell, on Facebook, Instagram, Threads. I do have a Twitter, but I don't usually post too much except when someone mentions me, and then I'll retweet it or whatever. But just look for my name on any of the social media. You should be able to find me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being part of the show. We're really happy to have you on. And as I said, when you're ready to promote your book, we'd
absolutely
really love to have you back on.
I will let you know.
All right. Well, for everyone that's out there in YouTube land or wherever else we're being featured, thank you so much for being part of the show, and we will see you all next week. Good night, everybody.